Hello, welcome to Chapter 25, America Moved to the City, 1865 to 1900. This is for the American Pageant textbook, which is for AP U.S. History or regular U.S. History, even in a dual enrollment U.S. History. I have a picture here of New York. This is in Manhattan. This is Little Italy at the time. This was the hubbub and the busyness of New York City. All the people and all the markets and the mixture of horses and buggies and all that stuff going on. And so with industrialization in the United States coupled with immigration, you get a big movement towards the cities, which we're going to discuss. And that in itself changes the United States forever. So the urban frontier in 1890, New York, Chicago, Philadelphia all had populations over 1 million people, which was pretty substantial back then. 1870, 25% of our country was urban population, living in cities or suburbs or nearby areas. By 1910, 50% of our country, more than, around half lived in cities. Today, it's around 79, 80% of our population lives in cities. It was fueled by immigrants going to New York, to Chicago, to Detroit. Rural Americans displaced by machineries. Farming became increasingly mechanized, and for opportunities and jobs, moved to the cities and industries and factories for work. Machinery, like I said, displaced farmers and craftsmen. African Americans that could escape sharecropping or tenant farming often left for southern cities. After 1914, they began to move to the north as a part of the Great Migration. People were attracted to the city also because there was amenities like electricity, indoor plumbing, telephones, nightlife. There's things to do. You can go to the opera. You can go to the ball game. There was more activities. There's more culture. You have a picture of Lower Manhattan with the famous Flatiron Building. I believe that's on Fifth Avenue. And so most migrations were driven by jobs. So this is the urban population in the United States. You can see it was only 5% in 1790. This is all from census data. And it grew and grew. By 1920, more than half of the country lived in cities, and that trend continues to this day. It's the same trend going on globally, actually. The whole world is becoming increasingly urbanized. So the urban frontier. Lewis Sullivan contributed to the development of cities. They grew up instead of out with the invention of the skyscraper. They used steel skeletons or frames to build taller and taller buildings. By simply making 2 floors, you could double your square footage in the same footprint, and you could stack and stack and stack. Like kind of like Scooby-Doo and Shaggy used to do with their sandwiches. They could get more meat, more cheese, and then eat it in one bite. That's how you would stack these buildings up. Elijah Otis invented the elevator in 1852, so you could make buildings taller and not have to go up and down stairs. Which Stanley from The Office, that's his favorite invention, is the elevators, because he will not do the stairs. He does not like that. In 1884, William LeBaron Jenney built the first skyscraper in Chicago. Lewis Sullivan kind of gave it some style, but the first skyscraper was in Chicago, not New York City. It was 10 stories tall. A story is about 10 feet. It's about a 100-foot tall building. Like I said, Lewis Sullivan gave it some style. The most famous of his buildings was the Woolworth Building in New York City, completed in 1913. It was 55 stories tall, which to compare, the tallest building in Denver today is 55 stories. The World Trade Center, the Twin Towers, when sadly they were destroyed, they used to be 110 stories tall. And so kind of give you an idea, perspective of how tall the buildings are in America. Here's the Flatiron Building today. Lost the cool American flag off the top. I'm not sure what's going on there. The Woolworth Building there on the left. A busy day at Dearden and Randolph Streets in Chicago. A lot of traffic jams and some original skyscrapers in Chicago at the time. So some of these new designs, there was this City Beautiful movement. Instead of being a concrete jungle and just a maze of streets, they decided, let's make it kind of nice. Let's bring nature into the city. Let's have squirrels and trees and grass and let the little animals frolic and stuff. And so this is a whole movement in the late 1800s. One of the best examples is Frederick Law Olmsted's designing Central Park, a former garbage dump, and there's a variety of things. And he designs it. New York builds this fabulous haven of nature and the outdoors in the middle of the most busy city in the United States, if not the world. And then you get these World's Fairs that would occur every few years or so, and they would travel around to big cities, and each city had to show off new architecture, new wonders, new inventions, and they tried to outdo each other. Getting around cities became much easier. In 1873, San Francisco built their cable car lines, which, if you've ever been to San Francisco, it's up and down hills, and cable cars are very nice because your legs get tired and your feet get tired. Virginia was the first place to use electric trolleys. The first subway was actually built in Boston. Subway, not the restaurant, but like you see in the bottom picture here. New York got its own in 1904. It looks more like a real roller coaster there, not covered in, and looks a little scary, a little dangerous maybe. Cities began to pave their streets, so it's not so mud infested and garbage and all that, and using actual pavement or concrete or cement instead of cobblestones, which could be very bumpy. That's a picture of me many years ago when I used to work at Grand Valley High School, rocking a mohawk. I did that for charity. Our principal shaved our mohawk in my head for the Make-A-Wish Foundation. I forgot I had to go to New York the next day on a vacation. Nobody in New York really minded. And there's me in Central Park with a mohawk, and then I set my hawk free by hawk. This is a very grainy old picture. It just kind of shows how big Central Park really is, and it's astounding. Until you see it, it's really amazing how big it is. You can see it from space here. This whole area is Manhattan. You can see it right in the middle there. On the left is the Hudson River, which is the border of New York and New Jersey. On the right is the East River, which basically cuts off Manhattan from Queens and Brooklyn, and then up north is the Bronx, and then down off the map is Staten Island, where the Wu-Tang Clan is from. Wu-Tang is for the children. Just keep that in mind. Building bridges. Because of steel and more architecture, they were spanning different bodies of water to try to connect more people. The 520-foot Eads Bridge opened in St. Louis in 1873. The Brooklyn Bridge, sometimes called the eighth wonder of the world, 1,600 feet, connected Brooklyn to Manhattan. It was completed May 24th, 1883. It took 13 years to build. Dozens of workers were killed in the construction. On the opening day, 1,800 vehicles went across it, horse and buggies, you name it. 150,000 and some more pedestrians went across it. And a very kind of unique thing about it, the first person to walk across the Brooklyn Bridge was Emily Warren Roebling. She was the daughter-in-law of the original designer and the wife of the architect, the guy who headed the project. The story goes that John Augustus Roebling, he designed this bridge, and then he died suddenly, and then his son Washington took over, and then he got sick. And actually his wife, not wanting the project to stall, studied civil engineering and oversaw the completion of the project herself, and so she was the first person to walk across the Brooklyn Bridge, which is still very fun. You can still walk across it, just if it's a cold day, make sure you bundle up. So it opens up more of the suburbs, and so people could live further away from the city, and they could live along train or trolley lines, and they could have a new house with a yard and, the white picket fence, and it's kind of the beginning of the materialistic American dream that's going on here. Here's a picture of the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge. Pretty astounding picture. Like I said, it took 13 years to build to cross the East River here. Some men working there. You don't see any safety harnesses. You can definitely see maybe why some people have died. There it is, and then there's an older picture. And if you look in the top right, you can see the Brooklyn Bridge, and just over the far away, structure, you see the Woolworth Building. To the left of that, you have the Twin Towers, which were destroyed in 9/11, sadly. Painting of the Brooklyn Bridge, the steamboat and sailboats, and all the people going across. Now, there were a lot of issues. You get that many people living in the city, trash becomes an issue. Waste. Used to be you just dumped it out the window. A lot of places didn't have indoor plumbing, so you used a chamber pot, and then you would dump it out the window. And so you throw away bottles and boxes and bags and cans. And sanitation, because of this, is not good. And when you have that many people and that many germs, people get sick, and you have all these disease outbreaks. So health concerns were huge. And then because most things were made out of wood, fire were a constant danger in the city. You have the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. One of the reasons why Chicago has the first skyscrapers is they had to rebuild about half the city. It was started by a cow, I think named Bessie or something like that, kicked over a lantern and started the Great Chicago Fire. Health and crime were a big issue. No sewage in places, no sanitation, no clean water. Instead of working in a factory and a sweatshop all day, making pitiful wages, some people turned to crime. And so crime is a very big problem in cities. You have disease epidemics. Poverty leads to high crime. Gangs roam the streets. There's gangs all over New York and Chicago and Philadelphia. These are this is in the Lower East Side of New York. Try to walk through that alley and not get jumped. A little scary. The guy's wearing a derby. That means he likes to fight, right? So they also cram people into substandard homes or apartments called tenement living, or dumbbell tenements. Housing could not keep up with all the people, and so cities had substandard living and horrible poverty going on. Most immigrants lived in these tenements, and I'll show you what they look like. Dumbbell tenements were apartment buildings that were dark. The whole hall was cramped into, using one toilet to themselves. Whole families are crammed into one-bedroom apartments. These are in the slums. They're absolutely filthy and nasty. They're crowded into small rooms. Several families shared a bathroom, which is just a nightmare in itself. And so in 1890, an author, a photojournalist of sorts, Jacob Riis, pictured here, looks a lot like Cliff Clavin from Cheers. Older people will get that reference. Published a book called How the Other Half Lives to show how the plight of the poor. And this really kind of opened the eyes in the Gilded Age that, hey, America is doing great. The age of industry is wonderful, and there's all this money. You have Rockefeller with all this money, and Carnegie and J.P. Morgan. And then the other half lives in extreme poverty. And here's many of the pictures coming from that book and from other publications during the era. Coming up, here's the dumbbells. You can see that they're shaped like a dumbbell. Their bedroom here, you could have a bedroom, a living room, a parlor. These are some of the bigger apartments here. Then the WC right there in the middle was a water closet. That's, if you ever go to Europe, that's how you find a bathroom. And so they share the whole hall. Then oftentimes, these living rooms and parlors would be rented out separately just for one family to cram into it. These are some of the dumbbells. You can see how close they are. In old movies, they used to run and jump building to building. This is how, but people would dump trash in there, and then, snow would get in there and the waste and everything, and the sun would never shine. It was just dark and nasty. Some shoddy construction on the top right, and then just garbage and nastiness in the streets. These are children over a sewer grate trying to stay warm. An old picture of some dumbbells that were still around in that design. Women working in a sweatshop in the bottom right. You have just some of the substandard living conditions. People crammed in. This just looks like awful, awful living. And it was shocking to Americans that this was going on in the United States. Family here. This is one family in an entire room. No privacy. It's very difficult living conditions in the cities. And this was all fueled by new immigration. Before 1865, most immigrants coming in were from Western and Northern Europe. They looked like Americans. The Americans that were there, they spoke English or something similar to English they could learn quickly. They were white like the rest of the country, and they fit in. They assimilated quickly. They fit the WASP ideal, white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, which is a powerful notion throughout American history. Immigration grew steadily after the Civil War, but it shifts from Western and Northern Europe to Eastern and Southern Europe. Immigration from Europe peaks in 1907, and 1.3 million Americans arrives. These new immigrants, like I said, were from Eastern and Southern Europe. 80% of that 1.3 million in 1907 were from those countries. Most of them were Catholic. They were Jews. They did not fit into the WASP ideal. Very few spoke English. They had funny-sounding names. They'd go through Ellis Island, and they'd have their name changed or misspelled. After 1900, more and more immigrants were coming from Mexico, from China, and from Japan. This is a personal picture here. This is my great-great-grandfather holding my great-grandmother, actually, Eva, there. They are immigrants from Italy. And then on his left is my great-grandma, Caroline. And so our Italian family came here in 1909. And so this is a later picture. My grandma was born in 1914. So the reason why people came here, they were pushed by the economy. They were pushed from persecution, hardships. Those were push factors. Sometimes they were seeking opportunity. They were pull factors. Land was the milk. America was known as the land of milk and honey. There was free land. There was, rumors the streets are paved with gold. The land of milk and honey, that actually comes from the Bible. It's an old biblical term. And rumors of the streets being paved with gold. And so America offered jobs and land and democracy and freedom. And so new immigrants came from countries with very little history of democratic governments. They didn't really know how to participate in the American style of government. They've grown accustomed to harsh living conditions. So you might wonder, how did people live in those places like that? They were used to it. That's how they lived in their home country. Many Americans feared that the new immigrants would not assimilate and they would change American culture, that they were going to take American jobs, that they were going to increase crime. And so they started to be, ask, is America a melting pot of all these cultures coming together, or a dumping ground for the refuse and the unwanted people of the world? Just to get to the ships was a very difficult trip. To get to America was not an easy task. Many walked, many rode horses. They sold all their possessions. They left everybody they knew, and left everything, their whole history, to move to a country that they have never been, and they don't know the culture. They don't know the language. They rode on a 12-day boat ride across the Atlantic to get here, often in the steerage or the bottom of the ship, not playing shuffleboard and going to, to dinner and having a buffet like you would think on a cruise. This was very difficult conditions. Many that arrived after the 1880s saw the Statue of Liberty. It was constructed or completed in 1886. It was a gift from the French for our 100th anniversary. It took 10 years to put up. Made out of copper. They had to raise money for the pedestal. In entering America, they were processed at Castle Gardens. To be a legal immigrant back then, you just stood in line and gave your name, pretty much. After 1892, they were processed at Ellis Island. If they came to the west, they were usually processed at Angel Island in San Francisco. Often the American workers misspelled their names or shortened them or changed them to sound more American. They were checked to make sure they didn't have infectious diseases, and then they were let into the country. My great-great-grandfather in the picture there, on the left was his Italian name, Gaetano Iantorno. When he came to America, he became Guy Santorno. And so family history, if you're doing any research, you're going to ellisisland.com. You can look up every single passenger role and its history. You might try different spellings. There's my great-great-grandfather when he landed February 7th, 1909, aboard the Louisiana ship. There's a picture of the Statue of Liberty. Pretty neat to go see. To raise money for the pedestal, they showed off pieces of it, and they did fundraisers, and this is the torch. Here's the head of it, and it was stunning. It was copper, and it was before it was corroded. This is the construction of it. This is actually in Paris, where they were building it before they shipped it in pieces to the United States. The History Channel tried to show what it would look like when it was copper. It would take quite a bit of an ordeal to clean that up and get rid of the corrosion today. At the Statue of Liberty is the poem by Emma Lazarus, The New Colossus, which states, "Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land, here at our sea-washed sunset gate shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities framed. Keep, ancient lands, your storied pomp," cries she, with silent lips. "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." Basically, if you need a new start, come to America. This is a chart of American immigration since the Civil War. You can see that the peaks and valleys of it, a lot of times there was peaks when there were problems in Europe. The valleys coincide usually with problems here in the United States, an economic panic, a war. After 1921 and 1924, there was quotas, and they basically legalized immigration. They had to be a legal immigrant after that. And so after 1924, all those numbers represent legal immigrants. And then in 1991 is the peak of immigration. Almost 2 million came. President Bush granted amnesty to immigrants at that point. And then it's a contentious issue today, in 2020, all that stuff. This shows the dramatic shift between England, Ireland, and Germany dropping and dwindling in terms of immigrants, and the increase of Austria, Hungary, Russian, Southern and Eastern Europe, Greek, peaking 1901 to 1910. So immigrants left their native countries because Europe had no room for them. There's really no land. The population of Europe doubled in the century after 1800. It doubled. 60 million people came or left Europe. Half of them came to America. Many came to Canada. Many went to South America. Other people went all over the globe to the colonies of these nations. America fever caught on in Europe, and as the United States was portrayed as the land of opportunities. Many people wrote letters home, beckoning people to come here, and maybe lied about how nice it was and how perfect it was in the U.S. Persecutions of minorities in Europe sent many immigrants here. They were fleeing for their lives, fleeing persecution. They were unwanted. And so many immigrants never actually intended to stay. Not everyone stayed. Many of those immigrants made a lot of money and went right back home. But millions of them stayed here, and it kind of creates a diversification that is the U.S. and what our nation is today. This is a political cartoon. The U.S. Ark of Refuge, free education, free land, free speech, free ballot, free lunch, no oppressive taxes, no expensive kings, no compulsory military service, no knots or dungeons. That's America. We can do that. And so we're going to stop there. If you have any questions or comments, put in the comments. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you for the next one.